The emergency board meeting at Mason Logistics had collapsed into chaos. Executives shouted over each other as $40 million in losses loomed on the screens. "Enough!" CEO Elizabeth Parker slammed her fist down. "I need solutions, not excuses." Frank Reynolds, the maintenance man everyone overlooked, quietly entered to fix the thermostat. Studying the route map on the screen, he muttered involuntarily, "That's backward." Elizabeth's head snapped toward him. "What did you say?" Frank's heart raced as all eyes turned to him. "Your distribution centers are connected backward, ma'am. That's why everything's failing." The room fell silent, executives staring in disbelief at the invisible man who'd just identified what they couldn't see. 3 days earlier, Frank's alarm had jolted him awake at 5:30 in the morning. His modest 2-bedroom apartment was still dark as he moved quietly through the familiar routine that defined his life as a single father. He prepared breakfast, peanut butter toast and sliced apples, alongside a carefully packed lunch for his 9-year-old daughter Sophie. The kitchen light flickered slightly, another item on his never-ending repair list. Frank checked her completed homework, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he braided her chestnut hair, tucking loose strands behind her ears. "Perfect," he whispered, though the word held deeper meaning. For 7 years since his wife Maria's death during childbirth, perfection meant keeping their small worlds spinning despite the hole left in their lives. The framed photo of Maria on the bookshelf seemed to watch over them with a perpetual smile. "Did you remember my asthma medicine, Dad?" Sophie asked, adjusting her red-framed glasses that magnified curious brown eyes that missed nothing. "Right here." Frank patted his pocket where he kept her emergency inhaler. "And your teacher has the backup at school." He'd learned the hard way never to take chances with her health. The terrifying midnight emergency room visit 2 years ago remained seared in his memory. The morning light revealed what the shadows hid, an engineering textbook on the kitchen counter. Bookmarked alongside complex diagrams Frank studied each night after Sophie went to bed. Coffee rings stained several pages, marking late nights of self-education. The mechanical engineering degree he never completed after becoming a widowed father still called to him in quiet moments. 3 semesters short of graduation, life had forced a different path. 3 bus transfers later, Frank arrived at Mason Logistics, a sprawling facility with gleaming glass headquarters where he'd worked maintenance shifts for 7 years. He changed into his gray uniform in the basement locker room, the name patch slightly faded from countless washes. His coworker Ted nodded a silent greeting, both men moving with the practiced efficiency of long-established routine. The company hierarchy was instantly visible. Executives in tailored suits, barely registering his existence as he mopped floors, fixed equipment, and kept the building functioning. Frank had memorized the patterns, knowing exactly when to become invisible, which hallways to avoid during executive meetings, which bathrooms would need attention after the morning coffee rush. Elizabeth Parker's arrival always created a ripple effect throughout the building. At 38, she commanded attention. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, with auburn hair pulled into a severe bun that emphasized sharp cheekbones and determined eyes. Her Mercedes purred to a stop in the reserved parking space closest to the entrance, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun. Frank was mopping the lobby when she strode through the revolving doors, her heels clicking a precise rhythm on the tile he'd just cleaned. She dropped several documents as she juggled her premium leather portfolio and steaming coffee. Frank immediately knelt to help, noticing technical diagrams among the papers. His trained eye caught an inconsistency in the routing schema, a minor flaw that could cascade into major inefficiencies. "Ma'am, I think there's an inconsistency in," Frank began, extending the papers toward her. "Thank you." Elizabeth's assistant intercepted, taking the documents without a glance at Frank. "Ms. Parker has a conference call in 2 minutes with Tokyo." Frank nodded, returning to his mop as Elizabeth disappeared into the elevator, never having made eye contact or acknowledged his presence. This was the natural order of Mason Logistics, invisible maintenance workers and the executives who couldn't see them. He pushed his cleaning cart toward the next section, swallowing the observation that might have saved them trouble later. Throughout his day, Frank moved through the building like a ghost, fixing flickering lights in conference rooms where executives discussed the looming crisis, repairing the coffee machine while overhearing conversations about supply chain inefficiencies. absorbing information no one realized he understood. Each problem they described connected in his mind like puzzle pieces, forming a clear picture. The Asian distribution centers are running at 40% capacity, while European hubs are overloaded, one manager complained to another, as Frank replaced air filters in the adjoining maintenance closet. Neither noticed him listening, analyzing, understanding. That evening, Frank's second life began when he picked up Sophie from the after-school program, her face lighting up at the sight of him. Their small apartment transformed as they spread out her science project about efficient systems, ironically mirroring the very problems Mason Logistics faced. The dining table disappeared beneath colored paper, markers, and string. "See, Dad, if we connect these points differently, everything moves faster," Sophie explained, arranging colored strings on her poster board to represent delivery routes. Her small fingers traced paths with surprising precision. Frank smiled, his entire demeanor changing away from work. Here his knowledge wasn't dismissed but celebrated. The tension in his shoulders eased as he knelt beside her chair. "That's exactly right, Soph. You've got a real talent for this." Sophie beamed at him, the gap from her recently lost front tooth making her smile even more endearing. "Miss Davis says I get my brains from somewhere. I told her my dad knows how to fix anything." That simple faith was a balm to Frank's soul, even as he struggled to reconcile his potential with his reality. He helped her complete the project, sharing principles of efficiency he'd learned in engineering classes years ago, translated into terms a 9-year-old could grasp. Meanwhile, Elizabeth sat alone in her corner office, the city lights creating a glittering backdrop to her solitude. She studied family photos on her desk, her parents at her business school graduation, her sister's family Christmas card with 3 smiling children and a golden retriever. Success had come at a price, and moments like these highlighted the emptiness of achievement without connection. Many mornings, life with outgoings, hunting for Christmas was the definition. Her phone buzzed with another crisis alert from operations. Elizabeth sighed, setting aside personal reflections for another time that never seemed to come. The projection screen flashed with new data, another delivery hub reporting delays. Her reflection in the window looked tired, though she would never admit it to her team. Friday afternoon, Frank overheard a serious conversation while replacing air filters in the conference room ventilation system. Executives discussed the impending supply chain collapse in urgent tones, unaware of his presence above the ceiling tiles. Their voices drifted up, clearly, through the open vent. "If we don't solve this by Monday, we're looking at $40 million in losses this quarter alone," the CFO warned, his voice tight with stress. "And the Hamilton contract will walk." "What about restructuring the European routes?" someone suggested. "The models show minimal improvement," came the frustrated reply. "We're missing something fundamental." Frank recognized the exact nature of the problem from the technical diagrams he glimpsed in Elizabeth's papers. During his lunch break in the deserted maintenance room, he sketched a potential solution on a napkin, carefully diagramming a more efficient delivery routing system. His pencil moved with surprising confidence, drawing on concepts from his unfinished degree. He stared at his creation, then slowly folded it and tucked it into his pocket. What was the point? No one would listen to the maintenance man. He'd be laughed out of the building for presuming to solve problems the executive team couldn't crack. His phone vibrated with a text from Sophie. "Dad, can I call? Math problem." Minutes later, Sophie's voice came through his phone, bright and curious. "Mr. Jackson says I should always raise my hand when I know the answer, even if I'm scared." Frank smiled, leaning against the wall of the maintenance closet. "Mr. Jackson sounds pretty smart." "You always tell me the same thing," Sophie replied with the directness only children possess. "So why do you look sad when you know answers at your work, but don't say anything?" Out of the mouths of babes. Frank stared at the folded napkin in his hand, considering his daughter's accidental wisdom. The sketch suddenly felt heavier in his pocket. The weekend brought crisis mode to Mason Logistics. Major clients threatened to leave, potentially costing millions in contracts. Frank was called in for overtime to maintain the emergency operations center, where Elizabeth led a crisis team through failed solution after failed solution. The atmosphere was electric with tension as each new approach hit the same wall of inefficiency. The pressure was visible on Elizabeth's face, slight shadows under her eyes, the tightness around her mouth as another approach proved ineffective. Her typical composure showed hairline fractures as she dismissed another unsuccessful simulation. Frank noticed the fundamental flaw in their approach while cleaning the conference room after a particularly heated strategy session. Their supply chain model was backward, prioritizing geographical proximity over load efficiency. The solution was simple in theory, but would require a complete restructuring of their delivery routes. Exactly what he'd sketched on his napkin. They were so focused on regional optimization, they couldn't see the system-wide solution. Frank approached Elizabeth's assistant in the hallway, napkin sketch in hand. "Excuse me, I think this might help with the delivery problem." His heart pounded as he unfolded his diagram. The assistant barely glanced at him, continuing to type on his tablet. "Thanks, I'll make sure it gets to the right people," he said dismissively, taking the napkin and promptly dropping it into a folder that was clearly destined for nowhere important. Later that evening, Frank glimpsed Elizabeth alone in her office through the partially open door as he emptied trash bins. Her professional armor momentarily lowered when she thought no one was watching. She stood at the window, one hand pressed against the glass, shoulders slightly slumped in a rare display of vulnerability. The weight of the company's future rested visibly upon her. For a brief moment, he saw not the intimidating CEO, but another human being carrying a burden. He nearly knocked on her door then, napkin diagram in hand, but courage failed him at the last moment. Instead, he silently continued his rounds, the solution to their crisis still hidden in his maintenance cart. Sunday morning brought an unexpected complication. Sophie had an asthma attack, mild but concerning enough that Frank couldn't leave her with the regular sitter. With no alternatives, he brought her to work, setting her up in the break room with books and strict instructions to stay put. "I'll check on you between rounds, okay? Just use your inhaler if you feel tight, and call me immediately." He placed a walkie-talkie beside her backpack, knowing cell reception was spotty in parts of the building. Elizabeth, working through the weekend like her staff, entered the break room for coffee and found Sophie instead. The girl was struggling with her inhaler, her breathing audibly labored. The sight immediately transformed the CEO's demeanor. "Are you all right?" Elizabeth asked, professional distance momentarily forgotten at the sight of a child in distress. Sophie nodded, though her eyes showed fear. "My dad works here. He's fixing the air conditioner upstairs." Elizabeth sat beside her, gently taking the inhaler. "I have a niece with asthma. Sometimes the inhaler gets stuck, may I?" With practiced movements, she helped Sophie take her medication properly, holding it correctly to ensure the medicine reached her lungs. Frank rushed in moments later, panic evident on his face until he saw Sophie breathing easier. He stopped short, seeing the CEO sitting with his daughter, an unexpected tableau in the utilitarian break room. "Mr. Reynolds," Elizabeth acknowledged, surprising him by knowing his name. "Your daughter is feeling better now?" Sophie, innocent of corporate hierarchies, smiled brightly at her father. "She fixed my inhaler, Dad, and I told her about your drawing that would fix the broken delivery system." Elizabeth's attention sharpened visibly, her gaze moving from daughter to father with new interest. "Drawing?" "Dad drew a map on a napkin that would make all the trucks go to the right places," Sophie explained proudly. "He's super smart about how things should move around. He was almost an engineer before Mom died." Frank's face flushed with embarrassment. "Sophie, Ms. Parker is very busy with important company matters." Elizabeth, however, had been searching for solutions too long to dismiss any possibility, even one from an unexpected source. The desperation of the company's situation outweighed convention. "I'd like to see this drawing, Mr. Reynolds. I gave it to your assistant yesterday, but—" Frank hesitated, not wanting to criticize staff. "But it's probably in the trash," Elizabeth finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Could you recreate it?" The search for the discarded napkin proved unsuccessful, but Elizabeth's desperation for solutions overcame conventional thinking. Against her team's obvious skepticism, she invited Frank to Monday's board meeting, ignoring raised eyebrows and sideways glances. "Sometimes answers come from unexpected places," she told her doubtful executive team. "At this point, we have nothing to lose." Frank spent Sunday night recreating his solution at his kitchen table, explaining the process to Sophie as he worked on a proper diagram. "See, they're thinking about the problem from headquarters outward, but it needs to be approached from the distribution centers inward. Like water flowing to the lowest point, Sophie observed, watching him draw with uncharacteristic focus. Frank smiled, momentarily forgetting tomorrow's intimidating meeting. Exactly like that. You've got a mind for systems. But as Sophie fell asleep, doubt crept in like a shadow. Frank sat in the dim light of their small kitchen, staring at his completed diagram. What if I'm wrong? He whispered to himself, the weight of tomorrow's meeting pressing down. Years of being invisible made visibility suddenly terrifying. And so Monday morning found Frank standing before Mason Logistics' most powerful executives, having just suggested their entire approach was backward. The silence following his statement felt eternal, broken only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning system he'd repaired last week. The COO recovered first, scoffing openly. And how exactly would you fix it, maintenance man? Please enlighten us with your expertise in global logistics. His tone dripped with condescension. Listen to me, Rudin. This company fucking needs... Elizabeth raised her hand, silencing him with a sharp gesture. Something in Frank's certainty resonated with her instincts, developed over years of business decisions. Let him speak. Frank approached the projection screen, acutely aware of his gray uniform among dark suits, of his work boots on the plush carpet. Your current system prioritizes geographical sectors, sending trucks to all delivery points in one area before moving to the next. But your distribution centers have varying inventory levels and specializations. He pulled out his carefully prepared diagram, now transferred to proper paper. If you instead create hub-based routing that prioritizes load type and urgency rather than geography, you eliminate half your empty return trips. The system flows naturally instead of fighting against itself. The COO laughed dismissively, leaning back in his leather chair. It can't possibly be that simple. We have analysts with PhDs who've been working on this for weeks. Elizabeth studied Frank's drawing, seeing the potential where others saw only a maintenance worker overstepping his boundaries. She made a decision that could either save the company or become her greatest professional embarrassment. Implement a test run on the Northwest Corridor. Now. The operations center hummed with tension as Frank's concept was programmed into the system. Analysts worked quickly, translating his hand-drawn diagram into digital instructions. Elizabeth stood beside him, both watching the simulation data flow across screens. Their shoulders nearly touched as they leaned forward, united in their focus despite coming from opposite ends of the corporate structure. If this works, she began, her voice low enough that only he could hear. When? Frank corrected quietly, then caught himself. Sorry, I didn't mean... No, Elizabeth's mouth curved slightly, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. When is right. The system began showing immediate efficiency improvements. 15% reduction in empty miles within the first hour. Projected cost savings appearing in real time as the algorithm optimized routes. The analysts looked increasingly surprised as the numbers continued improving. Elizabeth and Frank worked side by side into evening, professional barriers temporarily forgotten in the excitement of watching a solution unfold. As the office emptied, they found themselves alone in her office, reviewing the day's remarkable results by the glow of her computer screen. Where did you learn logistics modeling? She asked, genuine curiosity in her voice as she studied him with new eyes. Frank hesitated, unaccustomed to being seen. I was 3 semesters from a mechanical engineering degree at State when my wife died during childbirth. Sophie needed me more than I needed a diploma. Elizabeth nodded, understanding sacrifice in a way few would expect of her. And now? Now I make sure the building runs properly so people like you can keep the company running. He answered without resentment, simply stating his reality. People like me, Elizabeth repeated thoughtfully, rolling the phrase over in her mind. You know, I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night since becoming CEO. The board watches for any sign of weakness, especially from a female executive. Frank's phone rang. Sophie, worried about her dad's lateness. Elizabeth surprised him by taking the phone, introducing herself and assuring Sophie her father was helping solve an important problem. The easy way she spoke with the child revealed a warmth entirely absent from her professional persona. After the call, Elizabeth made a bold decision. "I want you to lead the implementation team for your solution, Mr. Reynolds. I'm offering you a temporary position with appropriate compensation." Frank blinked in surprise, his mind struggling to process the sudden reversal of fortune. "I'm just a maintenance worker." "No," Elizabeth countered with firm conviction. "You're the man who might save this company $40 million. Frank thought of Sophie, of opportunities he'd never been able to provide. Dance lessons she'd mentioned wistfully, a computer of her own, maybe even college someday. "What about my hours? Sophie needs—" "We'll ensure flexibility for your daughter's needs," Elizabeth promised without hesitation. "This company can certainly accommodate a father's responsibilities." Frank accepted with a handshake that bridged worlds typically kept separate by corporate hierarchy and social division. Over the next 2 weeks, Frank led the implementation of his solution across Mason Logistics' entire system. The transition from maintenance worker to project lead wasn't seamless. He struggled with corporate language, presentation software, and the politics of management meetings, where subtle power plays often overshadowed substantive discussion. Elizabeth helped personally, revealing a growing connection beyond professional interest. She coached him through his first executive presentation in the small conference room, demystifying the corporate world he'd observed but never participated in. "Just explain it like you did to Sophie," she advised as he fumbled with the slide transitions. "Clear, simple, true. They need to understand, not be impressed." Sophie visited the office one afternoon when school let out early, immediately connecting with Elizabeth over a shared love of puzzle solving. The CEO, who intimidated seasoned executives, sat cross-legged on her office floor, helping a 9-year-old arrange a complex three-dimensional puzzle. Her suit jacket draped carefully over her chair. "Your dad says you're the real brains behind his success," Elizabeth told her, fitting a piece into place. Sophie giggled, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Chad's smart about how things work. I'm smart about making him believe he's smart." Elizabeth's laugh echoed down the hallway, causing several employees to turn in surprise. Few had heard that sound before. The presentation day arrived with Frank nervously adjusting his new tie, a gift from Elizabeth with a note, "For the man who untangled our biggest knot." The boardroom filled with executives and major investors, their expectations palpable in the air. Frank's hands trembled slightly until he caught Elizabeth's encouraging nod from across the room. He began speaking, not with corporate jargon, but with authentic clarity. "Imagine you're delivering pizzas," he started, earning surprised looks from men and women accustomed to sophisticated business terminology. "If you take all the North Side orders first, regardless of when they came in, some pizzas get cold while others are rushed out too soon. Instead, we grouped deliveries by time, temperature needs, and capacity. The pizzas stay hot, drivers make more deliveries, and customers get exactly what they ordered when they expect it." His real-world analogy resonated where complex explanations had failed. The initial skepticism from board members turned to engagement as Frank walked them through the implementation results. $38 million in projected annual savings, 22% increase in on-time deliveries, 15% reduction in fuel costs. The COO attempted to position himself as having guided Frank's work. "When I brought Reynolds into the process, I recognized the potential of his grassroots perspective." Elizabeth interrupted smoothly, her voice pleasant but brooking no argument. "Let's be clear about credit where it's due. Frank identified a fundamental flaw our entire executive team missed, developed the solution independently, and has led implementation, despite having no official logistics role, until 2 weeks ago." The celebration lunch afterward found Frank invited to the executive dining room, though he clearly felt out of place among conversations about vacation homes and private schools. He excused himself early, finding refuge on the company balcony, where Elizabeth joined him minutes later. "Not your scene?" she asked, standing beside him as they looked out over the city, the spring breeze lifting strands of her hair that had escaped her usual severe bun. "I've cleaned that dining room more times than I've eaten in it," Frank admitted. "Hard to shake the feeling I don't belong." "Perhaps it's not you who needs to change," Elizabeth suggested, her voice softer than in the boardroom. I'd like to offer you a permanent position as logistics innovation specialist. Your perspective is exactly what this company needs more of. Frank hesitated, surprising her. That's incredibly generous, but I need to think about how it would change things for Sophie. Our routine works. She's stable, happy. Elizabeth nodded, unexpectedly moved by his priorities. Success means nothing without connection to what matters, she said, more to herself than to him. Take your time deciding. Frank considered for a moment, watching clouds cast moving shadows on the city below. The after-school program ends at 5, but executive meetings often run until 6 or 7. If Mason Logistics had an on-site program for employees' children, Elizabeth's eyes widened with realization. An after-school center here? That's actually brilliant. Her mind raced with possibilities. Not just for you, for all our working parents. This is exactly why we need different perspectives, Frank. 1 month later, Frank and Sophie settled into their new morning routine. Their apartment, while still modest, now featured new bookshelves filled with engineering texts and science kits, investments in both their futures. Sophie's asthma medication was now delivered automatically through the company's premium health plan. Frank dressed in business casual, finding a balance between his former and current roles. He still carried a multi-tool in his pocket. Old habits died hard, and he found himself fixing things around the office between strategy meetings. Some executives still looked past him, but others had begun to seek his perspective on problems beyond logistics. The new Mason Logistics Children's Center buzzed with activity as Frank dropped Sophie off. The converted office space now featured bright colors, learning stations, and professional caregivers. Elizabeth was there, touring potential investors through what had become a model corporate childcare facility and a recruitment advantage in a competitive industry. Sophie proudly showed Elizabeth her science project, an optimized model of the company's new delivery system constructed from recycled materials and color-coded string. I made it better, she announced confidently. Dad helped a little. Elizabeth laughed, her hand resting briefly on Sophie's shoulder. I'm sure he did. Innovation seems to run in the family. The final presentation, confirming the $40 million in savings, brought company-wide recognition. Frank, now confident but still humble, accepted applause from the same executives who had dismissed him months earlier. He nodded his thanks, still uncomfortable in the spotlight, but standing straight, with newfound confidence. Elizabeth announced company-wide policy changes, her voice carrying through the headquarters atrium. Mason Logistics is implementing a hidden talent initiative to identify and develop capabilities at every level of our organization. Titles don't determine value, people do. During the small celebration that followed, Frank quietly slipped away to fix a broken projector in conference room B. Some habits remained ingrained, despite his new position. The familiar task of repairing something tangible provided comfort amid the day's accolades. Elizabeth found him there, smiling at the familiar sight of him with tools in hand. Some things don't change. Some shouldn't, he replied, closing the projector case with a satisfying click. I've been thinking about what you said about seeing people for who they really are. Elizabeth leaned against the door frame, more relaxed than she'd been months ago. I spent years looking right past the solution to our biggest problem because it came in a gray uniform instead of a business suit. We all have blind spots, Frank offered generously, even maintenance men. That evening, Frank prepared dinner in his apartment, Sophie setting the table as he stirred pasta sauce, his late wife's recipe. The familiar domestic rhythm felt especially comforting after the day's corporate events. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Frank opened the door to find Elizabeth holding a folder, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, a far cry from her executive armor. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, making her look younger and more approachable. Sorry to drop by unannounced, she said, suddenly seeming less certain than the CEO who commanded boardrooms. I found these designs Sophie left in my office. Ideas for improving the children's center. I thought we might work on them together. Frank's smile spread slowly as he stepped back from the doorway. We were just about to have dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta. Dad makes the best spaghetti in the world, Sophie called from inside, rushing to greet their visitor with unrestrained enthusiasm. Is that so? Elizabeth's professional reserve melted completely as Sophie took her hand, pulling her inside. "I'd love to try it." Frank closed the door behind them, watching as Sophie eagerly showed Elizabeth her latest project sketches at the kitchen table. The CEO and the maintenance worker's daughter, heads bent together over colorful drawings. Planning improvements neither could have envisioned alone. He stirred the sauce, listening to their animated conversation, catching Elizabeth's eye when she glanced up at him. Her smile contained a question about possibilities, future dinners, conversations, connections beyond work. His answering smile held acceptance of whatever might come next. Sometimes the most important repairs weren't to buildings or systems, but to the connections between people who might otherwise never have truly seen each other at all.